From SBI's Executive Briefing Center in Dallas, Texas, the most watched and listened to content in B2B sales and marketing, it's the SBI Podcast with your host, Matt Shares.
Welcome to SBI TV, a weekly show dedicated to helping you make your number. Today we're going to demonstrate how a CRO disrupts their industry to crush their revenue number with lessons from what I believe to be one of the all-time greats in revenue growth, Paul Melchiorri. My name is Matt Shares. I'm the CEO of SBI. I'm also your host. Joining me in the studio today is my man Paul, straight from Philadelphia, although he doesn't live there anymore. That's where he hails from. He's the Chief Revenue Officer of Anaplan. So, Paul, great to see you.
Thank you.
Good to have you on the show. By way of introduction, I'd love for you to introduce yourself, introduce Anaplan, and then maybe just talk about your history in sales, because, I mean, you have really done some true transformational things that many of our audience and listeners want to be able to do. So go ahead.
Well, thanks. Great to be here, Matt. And started out my selling career back in 1983 when I graduated Villanova, national champion. So I got the Philadelphia Eagles, Villanova Wildcats, having a really good year.
So, get out.
I know, it's tough anyway. So need to get the Flyers and Sixers going. But anyway, did that and started at ADP, which I think is probably one of the best foundational companies to start, at least back then it was, because they actually invested in sales training and enablement, which a lot of companies don't do, as you know today. Spent some time doing that. And then I was kind of lucky to be in Philadelphia because there was a small German company called SAP that just happened to show up by the Philly airport back in 89, 90. And I was one of the first employees in the U.S. and spent about 9 years there, started as a sales rep, grew up the ladder, and was basically running North America in 1997, 98, totally unqualified for the job. No background in management, and just an individual sales guy that kind of rose up the ranks. So being in the right place at the right time. And then I wanted to go through that hyper growth again, and packed up the family, moved to Silicon Valley to go to a company called Ariba, pre-revenue. So spent about 15 years doing that, did some private equity work, and now I'm at Anaplan, which has just been a blast.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, it's a great company. It's solving a business problem that you wouldn't really think exists. So if you think about most of the Fortune companies, they traditionally, have invested millions, trillions of dollars in these ERP systems and transaction systems. Yet in order to make decisions and to run their business on a day-to-day basis, what do you think runs these Fortune companies? It's a product called Microsoft Excel. It's been around since probably before we were born. And that's a real business problem, and it hasn't been solved. And I think with Anaplan, we have an ability to really change the way these companies make decisions by connecting the people, the data, and the plans across these large organizations.
So in simple terms for the viewers and the listeners, because I believe Anaplan is a great product, the simple business problem that it solves, because many of the folks watching the show right now, Paul, should be your customers.
Absolutely.
Right? So I want to make sure they know about you.
Yes,
What is the simple business problem?
So it's really simple. You look at the challenges that these organizations have, especially today think of the Amazon effect. You have to make decisions in a much different way today. Whether you're in financial services and consumer products and retail, every industry is facing some level of disruption. So you can't wait a month, 2 months for data to make a decision. You need to do it in memory. You need to do it instantly. And that's really what Anaplan helps these organizations do.
Beautiful. All right. So Paul and I are going to jump into the show. An interesting stat, and we've had the good fortune of working together. Paul, I'm always intrigued. How did you first hear about SBI?
Well, actually, we're doing some work transitioning our professional services organization, and we really needed to figure out how to do it. So when companies are at a young stage like Anaplan was, where we're implementing our software, our professional services people are dedicated to getting the job done, getting the software screwed in, we're measuring them on margin and success of an implementation. It's very different when you have a model that's land, expand, and renew. So the profile of those professional services people is very different than the profile of a customer success organization. And so as we matured as a company, we realized that was a missing component. And we didn't have all the answers, because it's not like there's a template or cookbook out there for this. So we went through our evaluation process, made a very quick decision, and ran across you folks that really helped us put the strategy together, help develop the compensation plans, align the comp plans, put the job profiles together, making sure we had the ideal candidates to really make that transition. And we found some of the people we had in professional services weren't quite the right people to customer success. So that was a great program that we did with you guys, and we're evaluating an enablement program with you. We haven't signed anything. We're hoping that this will help facilitate a better price for me.
If I can't get the deal done after this,
I was going to say, yeah,
I need to turn the lights off and take the sign down.
That's
apparently
right.
I am the cobbler with holes in his shoes.
Right. Well, enablement's a big issue, as you can imagine, and sales enablement, partner enablement, customer success enablement, and so we are looking at a proposal for you to help us with that program.
Awesome. Well, it's great to hear. I know my team had a blast working with you guys, and it's fun to do meaningful work. So Paul and I are going to unpack a couple of key elements around high growth versus hyper growth. And you think about Paul's expertise. I mean, being at SAP in the 90s and going on that run, then going to Ariba, then going into private equity in the time that Paul did it, and now being at Anaplan. You think about the body of work that he's seen. If I was a CEO, I would watch this show, because this guy can tell you what your CRO should be doing. And if I was a CRO, I would be watching saying, I want to be him. So Paul, let's, I guess, orient high growth versus hyper growth.
Yeah.
You've seen them and you've lived in them. Talk about maybe the differences between the two and sort of how that normalized how you ran organizations.
Yeah, and it's a big difference, I think, Matt. And in a growth environment, there's challenges, and it's not easy. But in a hyper-growth environment, there's a few things that are different. Yep. I think the very first thing is the pace, right? So you think of the speed that you have to do things. Typically, if you're in hyper-growth, you're probably going against the big guys, right? You have a certain window that you have to get to be successful. So you have to go at a certain pace. And a lot of people honestly can't run at that pace. They just can't do it, right? Yeah. So if you think about an athlete, they run out of gas. It's not a marathon. It's really a sprint, but it's a sprint that goes on for a long time. So
you gotta be
pace,
fit.
you got to be fit, right? So you got to have that in your profile. So the pace is critical. Second is you have to have that sense of urgency, right? I mean, because that window can close, right? There's a reason you're hypergrowth, right? You're hypergrowth because you're doing something that no one else is doing as well, and you're in a big enough market that somebody's going to figure out we need to be in that market, and it's typically SAP, Oracle, IBM, the big guys are going to come in. So you have a very limited window in order to take advantage of it. And the third is the way you make decisions, right? In a typical environment, decision-making process is analytical. You do reference checking, you do process, you go through an RFP, whatever it is. You can't afford that in a hyper-growth environment. So you literally have to make decisions in a much more rapid fashion. And I'll just give you an example, not from my CRO time, but in the first 2 months I came to Anaplan, they let the CEO go. So I was the interim for 9 months, which was, I don't know how you do a CEO job, because it's not a fun job. Sales is a lot more fun.
If my employees are watching right now, you just saw that Paul has empathy for me and my role. So give me some empathy.
So think about a CRO or a head sales guy telling development people what to do. Very difficult, right? So we had analyzed for almost a year and a half what our integration strategy was going to be, whether we're going to buy a company, write our own, or partner. So I went back, I said, okay, guys, that's great. You got 2 weeks to make a decision. Of course, they all looked at me like, what do you mean, 2 weeks? I said, yeah, and you've been analyzing it for a year and a half. In 2 weeks, either A, I'm going to flip a coin, or I'm going to ask my 11-year-old daughter, Graziella, to decide. Believe it or not, in 2 weeks, we came back with a whole integration strategy. We partnered with Informatica, and the decision was done. And, I think that's the kind of difference between, being able to go through a more formalized, data-driven process to make decisions, and then really sometimes you do have to go with your gut.
Okay, very good. So now let's talk about performance conditions, because you and I go back to the days where a great sales guy or sales gal can kind of hide all other issues and they can get it done. Well, now there's this concept that instead of sales enablement, I call it revenue enablement. You got to enable the entire revenue supply chain. Everybody in marketing, product marketing, field marketing, partner marketing, customer marketing, the BD engine, the new logo hunting team, customer success, and then bifurcating customer success. So you can have 12 to 14 functions across the revenue enablement supply chain. You've been in hyper, you've been in high growth. What is the enablement cadence that you have ran that ensures that when you do have product market fit, like you all do at Anaplan, and you've got some nice tailwind, that you truly maximize it?
Yeah, that's key, because that is the difference today, right? I mean, before it was easy, you just enabled the top sales folks and it was over, right? If you had a good, sales engine, you were okay. Today, it's the broader revenue team. We actually have something we call One Revenue, which goes across all those functions you just mentioned, and enablement's a key component. So I think, we've developed something, and our new CEO that came in a little over a year ago, Frank Calderoni, came up and he brought some tenets from Cisco around vision, strategy, execution, and metrics, right? So really formalizing where that vision is to make sure that when you wake up every day, you know where you're going. You're all working from the same hymn book. It makes enablement easier. We just signed up our 1,000th employee, right?
Oh, wow.
It's fantastic, right?
Congratulations.
Well, that's good news. The bad news is over 500 of them weren't here about 14, 15 months ago. So think about the enablement challenge in that hyper growth. So if you don't have the proper vision, strategy, execution, and then metrics, you have to be able to measure people. And different people need to be measured in a different way, but there has to be consistency. So you can't have sales folks measuring something and then the marketing folks come in with different numbers and they're not working from the same hymn book. So that enablement that you mentioned has to go through the whole revenue chain. Yeah. And then if you have a partner ecosystem that are not your employees, they have to be part of the process as well. So it's a much more complicated enablement function, which is one of the reasons why we're looking at your proposal.
Yeah, I always like hearing this. So one of the things that I recognize in the work that I've done is the dilution effect. If you or Frank are delivering a message, by the time especially when you're growing, it's one thing if you have 500 employees and you deliver the message, it's going to get diluted. Right. But then if you think about adding, 50 headcount or 25 headcount a month, whatever the math is on that.
Or more, yeah.
Right, or more. Then you continue to have the dilution impact. So how have you guys solved that? Because I love that component of vision, strategy, execution, metrics, but you've doubled the company in 14 months. Yeah. So how do you make sure everybody's in the boat?
We start that every meeting with that slide. We put that VSEM slide up in every meeting. We've done a bunch of, kind of podcasts, communications, town hall meetings. There's no, replacement for that communication. You have to over-communicate it. If you think people know it, just assume they don't, or assume they didn't understand it the first time. It kind of sounds old school, but it really is. And you have different communication mechanisms now. So we do podcasts. We'll do an internal website. We'll do a number of different things. We'll do a company meeting once a quarter where we get the entire, 1,000 employees together. We record a bunch of this stuff so they can look at it on their own. So you have to do it. There's no silver bullet for communication.
You talk about that. Something we've implemented at SBI starting last year is 15-minute huddles every day in teams, right? So there's communication every day, and people are reading off their values card, talking about the one thing they got to do today, the one thing they said they were going to do yesterday, and somewhere where they're stuck. And it's as basic as that. But to your point, that rhythm of doing it every day just gets the flywheel. And, and we're 1/10 your size, but it makes a difference for everybody to be on the same page. Okay, last question in this segment, goal setting quotas in hypergrowth. How do you do it? What's your advice? Where have you skinned your knee or knees? And what do you share with the audience?
Well, let me tell you how I used to do it for 30 years, right? With Microsoft Excel spreadsheets and peanut butter, right? So think about how it's done in a lot of companies.
Perfect
You get your spreadsheets together, you peanut butter spread these quotas across 1,000 reps, 500 reps, whatever the number is, and you hope, right, that it works out. Then what happens 6 months later, you're changing it because you didn't really plan properly. That is the beauty, honestly, Matt, of Anaplan, and that's what one of the things that got me attracted to it, is that it has an ability through the planning mechanism to help score territories, to help you with the account planning, to be able to look at what that territory really should drive, and then plan and model all the different permutations and salutations and information. And then if you're looking at a certain number you have to hit from a commission standpoint that the CFO gives you, now you can look at comp modeling. So we're doing this for some of the world's largest companies, helping them with their incentive compensation, their comp modeling, their territory, their quota setting. And some of the companies are able to get the territories and quotas out within a couple of weeks of their year end, where in the past, it took companies like HP and Cisco 4, 5, 6 months.
You had to wait till Memorial Day
right.
to get your comp plan and your quota.
So think about a coin-operated salesperson. Yeah. I'm allowed to say that, being a salesperson.
No.
If you don't know what you're supposed to sell, when you're supposed to sell, and who you're supposed to sell to, and more importantly, how you're going to get paid, how do you think you're going to be productive-wise in those first couple of months where you really have no idea? So the sales productivity, is greatly enhanced. So that's honestly something that we've been very, very good at. I think in hypergrowth, regardless of technology, the balance, right? Yeah. So one of the things that differentiates a hypergrowth company is you have to set that bar ridiculously high, right? Because the expectations, the investors, all the things that set that. But you can't make that drive your territory and quota plan, because then you'll set unrealistic quotas, which then, sales reps aren't going to hit. You're going to have turnover. You still have the balance. You can't set it too low, because then you're overpaying, the CFO gets mad at you. So I think that's one of the values of having a platform like Anaplan that helps normalize that. Maybe not for if you have 25 reps, but if you have 25,000 reps or 2,500 reps or 500 or whatever that number is, once it gets to a number, it's really hard for you to determine it in sales ops or as a sales executive. So what winds up happening is you peanut butter spread it. So you really have to have it is science, no longer art once you get to a large hypergrowth environment.
Paul, one of the things that we've always prescribed with folks is that if you do it right, it being the concept of territory quota comp, if you have a $4 million patch and I have a $3 million patch, it's like golf. If you're a 2 and I'm a 20, 80 looks really different for both of us. Yeah. And territories and quotas should be done at the individual level.
Absolutely.
Everybody should have a different quota.
Absolutely. And it's hard to do that, right? Because you don't have the tools to do it, and you pass spreadsheets all around. And that's why people at the end of the day, they have to get them out. They just say, oh, you know what? Here's the peanut butter spread.
5 million.
And then that doesn't work. So I think it is a handicap system. I wish I was a 2, by the way. That would be nice.
I was hedging there.
We're definitely hedging. That's it. You're trying to get the business. I understand. But you do have to, and we have 4 different categories of quota with 180 reps. So it's not that bad. So, and they're based upon the territory scoring, the length and tenure of the rep, and those things go into it. So we can go have a quota of anywhere from 700,000 ACV up to 3 million ACV.
Okay.
So in a similar territory. So you have to do that, and then having a tool like we have to be able to model that and plan it allows you to get to that granular level that a lot of times you can't with. Will you
reallocate 3 to 6 months on a patch, or will you hold serve for a year?
Right now we are on annual quotas. I know we work with a lot of customers that have semi-annual quotas. Some have monthly quotas depending on what you're selling. We're in enterprise software, selling to large companies, 7-figure type of deals. So annual still is kind of the way to do it, which means it's so important to do the planning up front right, 100%. Because the last thing you want to do is go 3-4 months into a territory and either be adjusting quotas, right? Obviously, if you adjust them down, the sales reps are happy, but if you have to adjust them up, they're not going to be happy. And or if you're taking accounts away from folks, that's disruptive. So you want to go in and do your planning up front and then be able to iterate if you have to. But if you do better planning up front, there's less iteration that has to happen.
So as Paul and I wrap up this segment and move into the next one, a couple things I'd want you to take away. All kidding aside, their tool is truly amazing and transformative relative to the job to be done. For 12 years at our firm, we have continued to tell people that dynamic territory quota setting and then filling in a comp plan underneath it is the way it should work. And the handicapping system I was describing with Paul is what it should look like. Their tool allows you to do that. But as Paul said, the key is you've got to understand your sales force. If you're transactional, if you're doing 8, 9, 10 deals a month, annual quotas is like a 10-year plan. Doesn't make sense. On the flip side, if you're still in a 7-figure enterprise long sales cycle, you can with one key element. You got to get the inputs right relative to the plan. So the takeaway from segment number 1 is understand where the organization is between high growth and hyper growth. Understand your selling motion and what makes sense. Should you be quarterly, monthly, semi-annually, or annually? And then from there, also be outward in. You don't want to be taking accounts away from somebody when you assume that it was going to take 9 months to ramp, and it's actually going to take 18. All right, so Paul, second part of the second segment, first segment we spent time talking about performance conditions. We believe that sales excellence, revenue excellence is 50% talent, 50% the conditions in which you place that talent. So let's talk a little bit about talent. you've doubled the company. You've doubled, quadrupled selling heads since you walked in there. I'm sure your direct reports and those underneath them have changed. How do you attract the right talent? How much is getting hyper promoted from within? Have you gone out to do hired guns? Like, give some advice and some context, because you've seen it all.
Yeah, I think it's really all of the above. I think in that hyper growth, first of all, you have to have a great recruiting engine to attract the talent, right? So you have to have that execution engine to bring in the right volume of people. Second, I think the culture is so important, right? So if you're trying to attract, it's not just about the product. What kind of culture does the company have? Because people have choices today. We're at 100% employment in a lot of places. So attracting, and we're in a talent war. You have to win that talent war, and you do it with getting the volume of good candidates in, and then you have to sell them on the company. And one of the easy ways to sell them on the company is having a great dynamic culture that's fun. And that's why we point back to that VSEM we talked about where, hey, why are we here, right? It's not just about making money. How are we going to make that money? And I think if you have people that are excited about the task at hand, they want to be in this hyper-growth environment, they want to experience that, that's a big differentiator to be able to get that top talent. And then finding and identifying your ideal client or candidate profile. And usually you think it is what it is, but it's not, right? So we've gone through a couple iterations. So initially we thought we would bring people who knew the space, the traditional EPM space, from Oracle, SAP, and IBM. And that first round of sales reps didn't fare very well because they were accustomed to having a overarching sales organization from an SAP, Oracle, or IBM.
And a massive brand.
Big
Infrastructure.
Enterprise license agreement. They didn't know where procurement office was located, right? Or the IT infrastructure, say no to everything group, or God forbid, compliance, security review. All those things that when you're trying to land a Fortune company are very, very challenging. And you needed to have that kind of a profile to basically play all your games away. Right? Think about it. I mean, there's no such thing as an Anaplan shop. They're all SAP shops, they're IBM shops, they're Oracle shops. Right? So every game's an away game, and having that kind of a profile. And we found really two profiles that have worked for us in sales. And one is really young and smart, and aggressive and literally fearless. You have to have no fear, because if you're playing all these games away, it's just fearless. And then the other one, not to, be sexist, but the most successful sales reps at Anaplan are female. And I don't know why it is. We haven't done studies on it, but our top 6 W-2 wage earners last year were all
That's fantastic.
female.
So I have a thesis on that. My thesis is this. We're going to come out with our research for the 12th year, and one of the things we always look at is the competency profile, because we do thousands of assessments of people from reps all the way up to the CRO. And I would tell you one of the top 3 competencies to be a great seller today's day and age is empathy. And women have natural empathy to understand the dynamics of pain of change versus pain of same. Understanding how to architect consensus. They're much more collaborative that way. So I have a very strong thesis, not like I'm trying to lead the witness.
Well, we could help you there. I think we could give you some candidates to examine.
It sounds, and that makes sense. So how about the move of frontline sales management, second line sales management? I mean, you saw this in your days at SAP, you saw it at Ariba. I see this very often. Rainmakers to become coaches, not always great. But when you're growing at hypergrowth, sometimes the way I got promoted and you got promoted, we sold the most. So, next person up. Have you had a different profile, and have you gone a different way with sales management than you have with AEs and individual contributors?
Yes, and that's a good question, because I think the most important role at a company in hypergrowth is the frontline sales manager.
Dude, we are so on the same page.
Right? I mean, they could get rid of us.
Wind sucks.
But it's exactly. But those frontline folks make or break it, because you think about it, in early stage companies, and you're in hypergrowth, you don't have time to have all this infrastructure and process and all the things you would have in a normal growth organization. So you rely so much on those frontline folks. And they are empowered, and you have to empower them. That's one of the things that I think have done well. And then there's just not enough of them, right, who have been through and seen the movie before, who are fearless, who are willing to play those away games, and that can coach, right? Because sometimes the best salespeople are the worst coaches or the worst sales managers. So sometimes you just have to decide, how many you bring from outside, and then how many you promote within. And I think we've had a good mix. We've taken chances on a lot of folks who have never managed before, but knew the space, knew Anaplan, sold successfully, and knew the company well enough to be able to take a chance. And this is where the enablement we're trying to work with you is that sometimes it's better to take somebody who knows what we're doing and teach them a little bit of management 101 and coaching 101 than it is to take somebody who's been around management for 20 or 30 years and has to learn new stuff. Because a lot of times they have lost their fastball.
Yeah.
So.
But Paul, once again, so the beauty of Paul's answer is recognition of where Anaplan is in its maturity. So as you're watching the show, if you have a 20,000 person organization, the way you're thinking about frontline management and second line management, if you're growing 6% or 7%, it's very different than what Paul just articulated, because it's a series of trade-offs. And Paul's willing to live with less managerial sophistication because they're still in evangelizing mode, right? And as he said, nobody's an Anaplan shop. They got 1,200 people, 1,100 people. So understanding that maturity, and that speaks to you knowing what's required at certain points up the growth curve, growth maturity curve. All right, very good. So let's talk about right time, right place.
Yeah.
Because some would argue, you and I have seen some things over our careers that, 10 years ago, if you worked at Eloqua, it's like, oh, anybody can do that, right? And 5 years ago, if you worked at Tableau, it's like anybody can sell a Tableau, right? You guys are starting to get that reputation in the marketplace that the boat or that the fish are jumping in the boat.
Yeah.
So easier to be a CRO doing what you're doing, right place, right time?
Yeah, I just make sure before I left, I filled the fax machine up with paper for all these orders to come in. And well, now as an advisor at DocuSign, I just make sure our DocuSign, have enough envelopes in DocuSign that people can sign it. I wish it was that easy. Yeah. I think the product does sell itself when you get in front of the right people to sell it to. Yeah. The challenge is getting through that procurement process and all those other things to land. And then even once you land, if you land in a particular line of business, doesn't mean the other line of business is just going to buy it. So I think it does, it's always better to be lucky than good. And I think if I look at my history, being at SAP at the right time, right place, and back then we did have fax machines, so I did have and then at Ariba at the right place, right? A lot of it is luck, but you have to be in the right place to be lucky, and you can't screw it up once you're there. So you still have to execute, even if you're in a great spot.
So if I put you on the spot and I said you could only choose one path, 1,000 people, hyper-growth, is access the problem right now, top of funnel, or is expansion, going from a nickel to a dime and a dime to a quarter of available spend inside the install base? Because many of your peers are looking going, what do I do first? Because cost of acquisition to go get the incremental dollar, right, on the expansion path might be much better. So maybe I need to put heavy horsepower here instead of all my heavy horsepower in the world you and I grew up as the rainmakers at the front of the house. So
it's a very different model now, right? So if you think about it, landing's hard, right? Because you got to land in these large companies, get through procurement. But once you're through that, you might think it's easy to expand, but it's not, right? Because it's different lines of business. And then I talked a little bit about why we used you in the beginning, where we took our professional services organization and we're migrating it currently to a customer success organization. You cannot expand and renew without a strong customer success organization. So if I look at where the real revenue could be for us, of the 1,000, close to 1,000 customers we have, say 300-400 of them are, global 2,000 companies. We can literally not sell another new client, right? I won't have a job, of course, if we do that, but we can expand in those existing clients successfully and more than blow our number out. So I think you have to look at both, but I think today, especially if you're landing and then your whole model is to expand and renew, our upfront deals are big, but they're not real big. They get big. So the expansion part is critical, and I think that's where a lot of companies are struggling is how do I not only build that initial sales organization to go, hunt, but how do I then, once I got the hunting license, really go get 4, 5, 6x the revenue over the next 12 to 18 months?
So those of you that are listening, I asked Paul the question on access or expansion. If you want to do a quick pop quiz with yourself, you got a pen and a piece of paper, write down your access team, the new logo team, the marketing motion. How much of your commercial labor, your go-to-market labor, is being pushed at bringing in a new logo? Look at your customer success team, take all of that labor cost, how much is being pushed at the expansion motion, and then look at the cost to acquire and lifetime value. Put those two side by side, and then just ask yourself a simple math question. And the math question is this: relative to the allocation of my spend, where do I have the highest probability to generate the most in the least amount of time? And it's going to force you to ask a series of questions you might not know the answers to, but in my line of work, sometimes knowing the questions to ask leads you down the path. All right, very good. So last segment, I can do a little lightning round here, Paul. So there's hot topics facing many of your peers. I'm going to call the revenue generation leaders, and I want to get your opinion. So the first one is CROs that now own everything from the top of the funnel, tippity-top marketing, all the way through customer success like we're talking. And you have a lot of folks who grew up in sales who have patchworked and learned marketing, but the importance of marketing is significantly greater than it was when you and I started selling. So how do you think about that life cycle, the revenue life cycle, and the role of the CRO?
Yeah, it's changed, right? I mean, before it was a sales leader, right? Go hunt and then hunt the next one, right? Well, if you're in a land, expand, and renew business, you have to think about it that entire cycle, the cycle from the funnel and getting the business development working. And then I think when you think about that funnel, it's not only the direct sales folks and the funnel, it's your partner ecosystem and everything else. So, you have to think about it. And then all the way through that customer journey through the renewal. And there's just so many people that touch that. So it's no longer just sales. It truly is a one revenue team. And you have to think of it that way. And I think the challenge is a lot of sales folks are sales folks. They're not general managers. They're not as sensitive to the other areas of the business around implementation and delivery and customer success and support, all those things that go into the new way of selling, at least in a SaaS business. And so I think that's a big challenge. And it's a training opportunity and enablement opportunity for sales leaders to understand the marketing, the business development, the delivery, the customer success aspects.
Where do you find you're spending most of your time if we looked at the revenue life cycle? I mean, obviously you've historically grown up as a big deal guy and you've done really well. Do you find your allocation of time has changed across the revenue life cycle?
Dramatically. It's more sitting in governance steering committee meetings with executives on projects, because if I know we don't get this first project right, we're not getting a second project, right? So
welcome to my world.
Yeah, a lot more, exactly. A lot more of it is now in the back end of the process as opposed to the front end, which I think is the right way to do it, because if you think about the expand number, that could be a much bigger number in one of these Fortune companies than your initial first deal.
The customer optionality in an OpEx world has changed everything, right? It really has in terms of how decisions get made and where you allocate. Because in the old days, you lock them up with a big deal, right? And here comes maintenance and PS. And
those days are over.
Yes, they are. Next one I want to get your opinion on is this concept of customer experience. You touched on it a little earlier. If there was one thing that I am doing most of my personal work with CEOs, CROs, and heads of marketing on, it's what is customer experience? Because it's a multi-function issue. It starts at product, it goes all the way. It's not just about the product outcome, it's also about the emotional narrative of how I feel when I'm using whatever solution you've given me. How do you think about customer experience at Anaplan, and how is that shaping the way you're sort of mobilizing the one revenue team?
Yeah, one of the things that Frank, our new CEO, came in and did is implemented something we call customer first, right? So it really is nothing more than focusing on that customer. And it sounds great, and everybody says they're customer centric, they care about their customers, but we actually went through and mapped out the journey, right? From when we start at the top of the funnel to when we turn and provision an instance, to when they go their first live, experience in maintenance mode, their next use case. And if you thought about that entire journey, we started looking at, I think it was 78 different touch points. And of those 78 different touch points, and this lady, Natalie, who did an amazing job of mapping this all out, we realized we weren't best in class in all 78 touch points, let's put it that way, and realized we had a lot of improvements. So we actually sent about a half a dozen folks to the Disney Institute to show how customer experience really works. And you think about if you've ever been to Disney with your kids, the kid drops the ice cream cone within seconds. There's a new ice cream cone there. You never see a trash can being replaced. It's just a whole different, the business to consumer model in places like Disney is so foreign in business to business software.
Isn't it?
It's like the complete antithesis of it.
I know.
It's like, hey, sell it and we're out, right?
Yep.
So you can't do that anymore. You really have to think about that customer journey and all 78 steps and how do you improve those? Because, like you said, we're in this new world where they can throw you out a lot easier.
It's so funny. Our leader of service offering development is going to the Disney Institute this summer. We've been spending an inordinate amount of time on the concept of a frictionless experience, right? Just like you guys got to earn it every day. You're sitting in the big project meeting, I'm sitting in the big project meeting. People have a choice, right? So last question, artificial intelligence. It is the bumper sticker of choice right now that everybody's talking about. What's the impact of AI on sales revenue?
On sales revenue yet today, not material. Because a lot of that is somewhat embedded into Anaplan, planning and analytics. However, I see if you look 3, 4, 5 years down the road, not 30 years down the road, but it's happening today. The challenge, though, is you still need good, strong core data to make AI and ML and all these other things really work. There's a lot of use cases that you can immediately have impact. I think it's a great buzzword for now. But it's a reality that's going to hit us, and it's going to hit us pretty quick. And we're doing a lot around it because it's germane to our platform.
No.
And, we're working with companies like Google and their platform to help, make sales forecasting, for example, much more, AI ML. Because, with 25 reps, I know the difference between a sandbagger and somebody with rose-colored glasses. When you got 200 or 300 reps, it's really hard, totally to figure that stuff out. But AI can, working with our platform, AI can add that other set of eyes and ears that you just couldn't do on your own. So I think there's a lot of applicability in supply chain, in sales, in a lot of areas that it's going to have a big impact. Today's revenue is not as a big a number, but you better be prepared for it or you won't have any revenue.
Wow. Paul, I can't thank you enough, man. Great to see you.
Okay.
And thanks for coming by. Yeah,
right.
lots of fun. So if you just finished watching this show and the time flew and now you're saying, how do I get on the Paul train? A couple things I would tell you. There is no such thing as luck. So Paul was being humble when he talked about how lucky he was. It's amazing how the people that you think are the luckiest seem to be the hardest working, but they have unbelievable discipline on their craft. And here's a guy with 35 years in the business who truly has incredible discipline. Number 2, I would tell you pace of evolution. Paul's pace of evolution on how he's pushing the organization to think, how he's articulating customer experience, that's another indicator. Number 3, being unapologetic when it comes to your philosophy on people. You heard his answers about who the best people are in his organization, taking that, recognizing the pattern recognition, and going forward with it. So, as always, I appreciate your eyes and your ears. You can spend them many places. The fact you'd spend them with us, I'm very grateful for that. That's it for today. As always, until next time, I wish you good luck as you try and make your number.
This has been the SBI Podcast. For more information on the studio, SBI's Executive Briefing Center, our team, or to schedule a workshop, please visit salesbenchmarkindex.com.